For many of you celebrating President Obama's inauguration, it's important to realize what else this day symbolizes. The life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the greatest civil rights activist of the 20th century. And for that reason, I want to take a moment and make a tribute to one of the most inspiring figures that ever lived. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, the son of a Baptist minister and a school teacher. A dedicated academic, he entered Morehouse College, where he received a degree in sociology. Later, he received a degree in a bachelor's, in divinity. And in 1955, he obtained a PhD from Boston College. That same year would prove to be a pivotal moment in American history and would set the stage for a new era of social justice. Because on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to sit at the back of the bus in the section designated for blacks. Despite what we've learned about Rosa Parks in our history books, that she was some unruly woman that decided randomly one day she'd had enough, it's important to realize that revolutions don't happen overnight. This was merely the turning point of an ongoing struggle, one that had been building for years. Rosa Parks just happened to be the catalyst of a movement on the verge of breaking. On the day of the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King stepped up to lead the charge. And for the next 382 days, those in the movement were heavily targeted with violence, threats, and arrests. Until finally, in 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against racial segregation on public transportation. Refusing to bask in this small victory, King was relentless in his leadership and continued to fight for equal rights against all odds. He said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. King committed himself to the principles of Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha, which advocated peaceful protest and nonviolent civil disobedience above all. In fact, while he was incarcerated in 1963, he wrote in a famous letter that, quote, "It's a duty of an individual to protest and disobey unjust laws." And protest he did. Later that year, he led the largest march in Washington, D.C. with an unprecedented 250,000 people. That's the day Dr. King spoke his most famous words, "I have a dream." The monumental event was a turning point in the fight for civil rights, because 1 year later, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, which ended racial segregation. And the following year, 1965, the Voting Rights Act passed, ensuring the voting rights of African Americans. But King knew racism wasn't the only social ill. He immediately sought to fight for a new struggle unfolding beyond the borders of this country, Vietnam. For the next 3 years, he became extremely outspoken against the war. His words transcend time and space and ring so true to the values that we as human beings should strive to uphold when faced with any unjust act of aggression.
There are those who are seeking to equate dissent with disloyalty. And it's a dark day in our nation when high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. Something is happening and people are not going to be silent. The truth must be told.
He's right. The truth must be told, no matter what the cost, no matter what the stakes, even if it meant death. And tragically, that was the case for King. On April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated. Now, there's still a lot of speculation surrounding his death, and in fact, many question whether or not the FBI actually played a role in it, considering how King was subject to COINTELPRO federal surveillance against him for years. He was even coined the most dangerous and effective Negro leader in the country, end quote, by the U.S. government. On the day of his assassination, it was Robert Kennedy who broke the news of his death while speaking to an all-black audience. While emotions ran high, Kennedy spoke words that Dr. King himself would be proud of.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
Guys, race might not be the dividing factor it once was, but we continue to be a country divided nonetheless. You know, I tend to end this show with a lot of cynicism. We would be blind to not recognize at face value alone the milestone this country has reached in electing a black man as our president, when only 50 years ago, blacks and whites couldn't even sit together at a diner. Now, as much criticism that I have for this administration, it's important to recognize the revolution that has occurred in this nation's social consciousness. And with all the division, hatred, pessimism that exists at this moment among the populace, we need to heed Dr. King's most profound advice of all, who said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that.